Have you ever tried to make your images have that fine art, painterly kind of feel to them that the old masters sort of have? Well, that's what we're looking at doing today with some of our still life images taken at one of our workshops here at Studio Photography Workshops. So I've got a whole selection of images, and we're going to try and do this entire edit in Lightroom because I want to do as much as I can, as simple as I can in Lightroom. And let's see what we can create. So I've got a whole selection of images that I took. The first thing I was thinking was grabbing maybe one of these images here that had sort of a bit more going on. Got a bit of a painterly sort of vibe to it anyway. I haven't planned any of this at all. I am just absolutely winging it and freestyling this and seeing whatever I think we're going to do. I haven't looked at these images before and had a plan. So this is going to go one of two ways, really. So first thing I always start with is my crop. I always start with a crop. Now I've composed this in shot on the 3rd. If I'm honest, I kind of like my crop as it is. All I'm going to do is actually bring it in a tiny little bit more. And I kind of like it being just off onto that 3rd as it is there. Now I have some presets that are already built in to my Lightroom so that whenever I import an image in, it does some certain things. So there's some bits that are already done here. So I'm actually going to reset that so you can see what it was like beforehand. So mainly the only thing that happened on this one was the shadows. And it's going to have changed the colour balance ever so slightly. So playing with that, let's have a look. So the first thing that I look at is I look for what's distracting me. What's causing a distraction? What am I drawn to? Now, I want to be drawn to the flowers, and really I am drawn to the flowers. They are the brightest part. This white flower might be a little bit too distracting. We've got a lot of rainbow colours, and we're going for an old masters look. So first thing I'm going to do is actually pull my highlights down. I'm going to pull my highlights down, and I'm going to pull my shadows up. And by doing this, I'm essentially flattening the image. What I'm doing is flattening out the curves, and my lighting, my definition that I put into the image in camera will always be there. There will always be more shadows under this section than there is at the top. So by flattening my image, the first thing I'm going to do is almost give it a very painterly effect, because I'm going to have that beautiful texture and I'm going to be able to see everything in it. But the lighting was always controlled in the studio. So firstly, I quite like that. Now, colouring's not quite for me. I play with my white balance quite a lot, actually, in camera. Yeah, it's one of those things you can play around with after, doesn't make a difference. I don't care. I like to do it in camera. But for this, I actually think it might be quite nice to go quite warm. Cool would work too. We could play with quite cool, but I think quite a nice warm, vintagey kind of look here would be nice. And it's looking a bit green, so I'm going to add a little bit more magenta into that to pump the colours. Apart from that, I'm kind of happy because actually, exposure wise, I'm kind of happy with where it is. Contrast wise, I'm happy with my highlights and shadows. The only thing that I think I might do is pull down this vibrance. Now, I can pull the vibrance down like this and it's going to drag everything out of the entire image, which will give me a very vintage look. However, I kind of like the HSL settings down here. I like to be able to play manually. And what I want to tone down is this blue and these purples. Now I can go to the sliders and find the right ones if I want to do that. But I'm actually going to take the adjustment, I don't know what we call that, the button. And I'm going to click on those purples and I'm going to play with it like that. And you can see it's only affected that exact colour. So it's only grabbed a little bit because obviously there's some purple I've picked on a magenta. So if I now go on a purple, still hit my magenta. There we go. I can now control those purples, and I think that's a lot more pleasing. I also want to get that blue. Let's see if I can do it from this angle. Yes, I can. I want to almost eliminate that blue entirely. I think it's a little bit too strong. And let's see what the yellows do, because I like the yellows. I think they're quite nice, but yeah, turn it down a little bit. I think it's quite good. playing with that red. So I can manually control, rather than bringing my vibrance down, my saturation down, and pulling everything away. I can control exactly what ones I want to really pop. Now, after that, I'm going to go down to my color grading. I love color grading. I play with color grading a lot. And for me, mostly I do two-tone color grading using shadows and highlights, using complementary colors. Most my images in my style are one color. They're very green, they're very red, or they're very blue. So for me, this is actually quite a multicolored image. So I'm going to actually pull some warmth into my shadows, being identifying my shadows as very much the background here. I'm going to pour a little bit of orange, and I'm going to possibly lift up the luminance of the shadows a little bit more. And then doing the opposite on my highlights, I'm going to pull down the luminance on the highlights, but I'm going to add in the teal kind of color, the opposite color. Now, this would also work if I add those orange tones as well, and I can play around a little bit, but I think this teal, strong kind of bluey color there is going to look quite nice. And again, I've ever so slightly flattened that image, but it's given that painterly kind of feel to it. So next, simple things I can play with. I want to add a vignette. Now, I can do that down here, and I can add a vignette around, and it's very vintage and it's quite classic. However, I don't want to do that. I'm going to do it using my masking. I think instead of just adding a radial gradient around and doing a darkening like that, I think we can get a bit more clever than that. So let's delete that mask. I think if I use two linear gradients, I want to create a beam, a pool of light coming in, hitting these flowers. So I'm going to create one in here, and I'm going to take my exposure down. But because this image is quite warm, I'm also going to bring my temperature up, because my shadows would be warm. It would make sense. I'm then going to do another linear gradient and come from here and do the same thing again. Very warm in there. And I'm actually going to play with the feathering a little bit more here. And I can tweak it afterwards, because that's the beauty of working with masks. I can play around, create that beam a little bit stronger, pull that side down a little bit more, and come out to there. And actually, I quite like that. If we just look at before and after, we've got this nice beam of light now coming through, which I think is quite pleasant. Now, if this beam of light was truly coming through, this area of the flowers would be a little bit brighter than the others. So I'm going to be true to that, using my brush and just hit these, and I'm going to up my highlights. No, I'm not going to use exposure, because that will bring up the background as well. I'm just going to up my highlights on this, and I can then paint in any of the bits I think should just catch the light a little bit more. I think that's quite painterly and quite nice. So overall, I'm very happy with that. I think that looks quite nice. If I go back to the original, it's very different. So now I'm looking, I'm going to add a little bit more pink. Yep. Now, the only thing I can do is, if I want to make this even more vintage, I can start playing with some other effects. Now, you have to beware. If you start playing with clarity and your texture, you are being a little bit more destructive to your pixels. And these sort of effects can really show in printing. But if you're just doing a digital edit, then you can pretty much get away with most things. If I just up my clarity, you can see that the texture's just immediately gone up, and again taking it down, and texture, same again, and coming down. So actually it looks quite nice soft focus. I quite like that, but I'm going to go for a sharper sort of look. I'm going to pull up my texture, pull up my clarity ever so slightly. And let's have a look at playing with a bit more vintage look. I love this. I think this image is done. I think it's nice, but I might go back to that post-crop vignette and actually look at adding in more. Let's see what we can create here. Because there we go. I can get it to the edges. I can never remember which way around all this goes. And create almost a faded photograph. There we go. I can get a kind of, faded kind of look just to the edge, just to add that sort of film effect. And if I really want to up it, I've got the grain down here too that I can kind of add some grain effect. Yeah, that's really, really pushing the vintage now. And more than that, I think if I go back to my shadows, I might even raise that a little bit more. And now we're really getting a vintage kind of effect to it. Obviously, the easiest and well, it's not easiest, I suppose, but the best way of doing this is shoot on film. But that's not what we had the option to do this day. I think that's looking really nice. I'm really happy with that as an edit, and I think I've got that vintage effect that I wanted. Nothing's particularly distracting me too much. If it was really being pernitty about things, I might add a few more masks in. I quite like when I've got glass bowls and things like that, adding a little bit of a reflection, which I think can make it look a bit more 3D. My own sort of personal preference there. But yeah, I'm happy with that. Let me know in the comments what you think if you're still here, and if there's anything that you'd like to learn or like to do, put it down in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you next time.